The Disciplines Essential in the Spiritual Aspirant, Part 4, Sri Muruganar.
Translated and presented by Robert Butler. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana. So we'll get started today with the prayer song from Sri Guru Ramana Prasadam, verse 493.
உனை யான் ஒரு காலும் மறந்தொழியா நினைவானையல் பரபக்தி நிலை என்னை ஆளுடை எம்பெருமான் இது நான் இணையாமல் எனக்கு இனிது ஈந்தருளே உனையான் ஒரு காலும் மறந்தொழிய நினைவானையல் பரபக்தி நிலை என்னை ஆளுடை எம்பெருமான் இது நான் இணையாமல் எனக்கு இனிது ஈந்தருளே என்னை ஆளுடையம் பெருமான் இது நான் இணையாமல் எனக்கு இனிது ஈந்தருளே.
Great Lord, you who hold me in your thrall, free me from suffering and graciously grant that state of absolute devotion wherein my thoughts will be incapable of straying from you even for an instant.
Okay. Namaskaram. So we'll get started today with the 10th discipline from Sri Muruganar's book, Neṟi 10. Anand, please.
பரம் உணர்ந்தோனே பார்ப்பான். பரம் உணர்ந்தோனே பார்ப்பான்.
Robert.
He only is a Brahmin, a seer, who knows the supreme reality.
So with regards to this Neṟi, there is a quote from Bhagavan, which is a conversation which happened on 15th of December 1938. A devotee asked Bhagavan, are not the Brahmins considered to be the priests or intermediaries between God and others? To which Bhagavan responded, Robert?
Yes, but who is a Brahmin? A Brahmin is one who has realized Brahman. Such a one has no sense of individuality in him. He cannot think that he acts as an intermediary.
So, you want to comment on that?
Yeah. The key to this Neṟi is the word papan, which means one who sees. The word papan, meaning Brahman, can be traced back to the oldest Sangam literature. One of the older anthologies, Kurantagay, consists of an address to a Brahmin. The hero of the poem, a lover parted from his beloved, is addressing his Brahmin companion and advisor, saying, "So Brahmin, is there some formula within those holy teachings which has the power to unite those who are parted? If not, all you say is mere delusion." This poem would be dated from the first 500 years of the Christian era, possibly as early as 200 CE, when Vedic culture was just beginning to become established in South India. So we see that the usage papan is quite old. It goes back even to the time before the Brahmin culture was fully established in South India. Brahmins traditionally claim descent from 8 Vedic rishis: Atri, Bharadvaja, Bhrigu, Gautama, Kashyapa, Vashishta, Vishvamitra, and Agastya. So presumably the term papan, meaning one who sees the truth, reality, or the future, as in the Western word seer, And then the term is then applied by extension to Brahmins who claim descent from those seers. So really, this is a simple play on words saying that the only true seer is one who sees the supreme reality, not a Brahmin or anyone else for that matter. Other than being the source for that play on words, there is no question of the Brahmin caste being singled out for any particular reason. The idea is simply that whatever position you occupy in life, your true status is dependent only upon the degree to which you have learned the truth of your own nature.
Right. Do you have any other comments on this, Neṟi, Robert?
No, that was it for that one.
Okay, so at this point, I will open it up for comments or questions for Robert. So if not, we'll go to the next Neṟi. Just 11th Neṟi. Anand, please.
ஜீவன் கயிற்றில் பாம்பு போல் ஆன்மாவில் கற்பிதன். ஜீவன் கயிற்றில் பாம்பு போல் ஆன்மாவில் கற்பிதன்.
The ego self, jīva, is an imaginary appearance in the self, like the snake erroneously perceived in the rope. We have discussed the snake and rope analogy in relation to Neṟi 8. It has also been discussed at length by Michael James in previous talks. Just as in uncertain light, we might take a coiled rope to be a snake, in the uncertain light of mental awareness, we are unable to perceive ourselves as the underlying reality of the self and take the ego self, the jīva, which is just a mental projection, to be the self instead. Since we're still at an early stage in studying these Neṟis, it may be worth saying something about the nature and usefulness of analogies such as this one. We should not fall into the trap of expecting every term of an analogy to match that to which the comparison is made. For example, in the snake and rope analogy, which is being pointed at, what is being pointed at is the idea of misperception, the way that the mind can hoodwink us into believing that what it imagines is actually, imagines is actually real. There is no point analyzing what exactly the rope and snake represent and what relation exists between them, for example. That is not the point of the analogy. To take another example, if we were talking about how the jnani's view of the world differs from that of the aññāni, we might use the water in the mirror analogy. The jnani sees the world as an insubstantial appearance within the eternal self, or Brahman, and does not endow that world with a reality of its own. In the same way that someone who sees a mirage of water in a desert, once he realizes there is no actual water there, does not attempt to draw water from it. Thus, this is a good way of explaining to some degree how the jnani can be in the world, in a sense, but not of it. Again, issues such as the nature of the mirage and the desert are not in question. Sadhuam talks about this in the Path of Sri Ramana, chapter 8. Here he is preparing to give some analogies to illustrate the practice of self-investigation, but adds the following proviso. Do we have a slide there?
Yeah. There you go.
Although most of the comparisons that are being given to people in accordance with their level of understanding, wait a minute, although most, sorry, I'll start again. Although most of the comparisons that have been given to people in accordance with their level of understanding and the circumstances of their times may be appropriate to a great extent, these gross or jada examples cannot fully describe their object of comparison, which is the self, which is of the nature of undifferentiated knowledge, i.e. jnana. The example which Bhagwan often gave of a cinema projector and the one given below, that's later in the book, of light reflected in a mirror, can go a long way to clearing the doubts of readers and generating in them a clear understanding, but which should not stretch the comparison too far, as in the story of the blind man who, after being told that milk was white, concluded that his child had swallowed a crane.
This is such an important point, right? Sometimes we give an example, an illustration, and people get exactly. People get sidetracked and they get stung on it, and then they are now in that realm of something phenomenal, rather than using it as an example to just focus on the self. And could you please go ahead and explain that story, or the analogy here?
In the book, Bhagwan Sri Ramana, Sadhguru gives a note explaining what is meant by this analogy, and that note is as follows. The story referred to above is as follows. A man who has been blind from birth was overjoyed on hearing that a son had been born to him. The next day, news came that the child had died. The grieving father asked how his son had died. The conversation with the messenger went like this. How did my baby die? Oh, it was when he was drinking milk. What is milk like? Milk is white. What is white like? White is like the crane. Or what is the crane like? Losing patience, the messenger flexed his wrist and held it up. Like this, he said. The blind man felt his hand and lamented, no wonder my child died after swallowing something so large.
Okay. That's good.
That's the analogy to explain the over-elaboration of similes, which are meant to illustrate a single point, and then people spend years, months, or lifetimes trying to make them relate to the nature of the universe or something else or whatever it is.
Right. Any comments or questions for Robert on this? This is a common analogy, so where he illustrated with another analogy too, but then he finally also brought up this quote from Swami Swadhyam to illustrate the limitations of all these analogies. So any comments or questions?
Oh, there was...
Okay. Did you want to say something, Robert?
There was that final Orivalodicum. Does that go here, doesn't it?
Oh, okay. I will bring that up. I think it's in the next one here.
Maybe
it was.
We put it in the next Neṟi by mistake.
Yeah.
Probably was a last minute thing,
yeah.
wasn't it? That's why we did that.
All right. Let's. Pull that up really quick. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, in Orivalodicum verse 20, it says, can divine silence, the undivided non-dual bliss, which is one-fold yet two-fold, like the trunk of an elephant, be grasped by speech or mind? If you dwell upon it with the insight of jnana, in the way one recognizes a house by the crow perched upon it, or the moon by the finger pointing at it, you will become Shivam. I quite like the one about the bird on the house, because imagine a house surrounded by trees and all you can see is a crow sitting on top of it, and somebody, you know, and you say, "Where's the house?" Well, it's underneath that crow. Well, you have no idea. You've no idea what's underneath the crow, really, but you know you have to go to where the crow is and find out what's there, and that's, you know, what the guru is telling you. You know, find out your true nature. Don't go parroting the words that I say. Go and look for yourself. So it's another example of what we were saying before, that also the finger pointing to the moon, which is very commonly used in Zen Buddhist scriptures as well, to indicate that the teacher's instruction is just a guide for you to look in the right direction. You know, don't try to you study the nature of the guru's finger, for example. You know. So that's that one finished.
Right. So any questions or comments?
We silenced everybody, have we?
Okay. Now let's go.
Yeah, I'll say something here.
Yes, Stephen, go ahead.
I'm noticing focus on what people are saying as opposed to what I'm listening for or listening to. So when Robert pointed the finger and said it's underneath the crow, and not to focus on the end of the finger, was really
exactly right.
It was just, you know, it was just a good moment that had me think that it goes back to last Saturday, and Michael was speaking, and I said, really, you know, it's not about what people are speaking as much as it's an equal balance of what people are saying and what I'm listening to and listening for, because my ego gets to filter what's being said.
Right. It's what is being pointed towards, not the pointer itself. Right.
Again, I'll repeat what Bhagavan said about when somebody said, is self-realization related more to thought or to feeling? And he said it's related to feeling, because you can't think being, you can only be being.
Right.
So all these things are just noise. We're looking for something way beyond anything that we're saying.
Right.
Well, not way beyond, because the saying it's all part of it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's right there. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to the 12th Neṟi. Anand, please.
ஒவ்வொரு உயிர்க்கும் இயல்பாகவே தன்னிடத்து நிகழும் அன்பால் ஆன்மா சுக-ஸ்வரூபமாம். அகந்தை அற ஆன்மஸ்வரூபத்தை உள்ளபடி உணர்ந்தோர்க்கு அவ்வடிவாகவே விளங்கும் பரனிடம் சுபாவமாகவே கசியும் பக்தியால் ஆத்ம-ஞானமே பரபக்தி என்று வேறு பெயரால் கூறப்படுவதாம். எனவே பரபக்தியும் aparokṣa ஞானமும் வேறன்றாம். You want me to read it again?
Sure, good. Go ahead.
Yeah. ஒவ்வொரு உயிர்க்கும் இயல்பாகவே தன்னிடத்து நிகழும் அன்பால் ஆன்மா சுக-ஸ்வரூபமாம். அகந்தை அற ஆன்மஸ்வரூபத்தை உள்ளபடி உணர்ந்தோர்க்கு அவ்வடிவாகவே விளங்கும் பரனிடம் சுபாவமாகவே கசியும் பக்தியால் ஆத்ம-ஞானமே பரபக்தி என்று வேறு பெயரால் கூறப்படுவதாம். எனவே பரபக்தியும் aparokṣa ஞானமும் வேறன்றாம்.
It's such an important principle. Basically concludes that parabhakti and aparokṣa ஞான are no different. So we'll read the English translation. Robert, please.
Because of the love for oneself that naturally shines in each and every jīva, the self is the very form of bliss, sukha-svarūpa. For those who know the self, ātma-svarūpa, as it is when the ego is eradicated, there arises a naturally heart-melting love for the Supreme, which shines as that self. It is because of this love that knowledge of the self, ātma-jñāna, is also known by the other name of supreme love, parabhakti. Therefore, supreme love and directly intuited knowledge of the self, aparokṣa ஞāna, are not different.
Right. You want to go ahead and comment on that, please?
And then you will come in again with the final slide.
Yeah.
In this Neṟi, two important points are being made by Muruganar. The first is that the love that the jīva feels for itself is only a reflection of the nature of the underlying self, whose nature is bliss. And that when that jīva is unmasked as unreal, that love shines as the undifferentiated love, which is the nature of the self. In the following quote, Bhagavan compares the bliss of the self to sugar, in that it is the presence alone of sugar that makes all things sweet, just as all blissful feelings related to phenomena are simply a reflection of the bliss of the self. Bhagavan said, and I'll give the source for it later, you make all kinds of sweets of various ingredients and in various shapes, and they all taste sweet because there is sugar in all of them, and sweetness is the nature of sugar. In the same way, all experiences and the absence of them contain the illumination which is the nature of the self. Without the self, they cannot be experienced. Just as without sugar, not one of the articles you make can taste sweet. That's from the teachings of Bhagavan by Sri Arthur Osborne, Sri Ramana Maharshi, in his own words. And then the second point being made is that parabhakti, supreme devotion, and jnana, true knowledge, are not different. Jnana vichara embodies the negative aspect of realization, which is to deny attention to thoughts and to focus on the point of their arising until the ego mind is subsumed in the self and permanently ended, just like the river that flows into the ocean, whilst parabhakti is to entertain just one thought, that of union with the divine, so that in the end, even that thought is abolished, like the stick used to stir the funeral pyre, which is itself consumed by the flames in the end. Since both end with the dissolution of the ego and the consequent experiences of non-dual bliss, both terms indicate the same final state. And then we have a quote from Muruganar from the notes to Aksharamanamala, where he explains parabhakti.
Yeah. So let me pull that up. It's just for, this is Sri Muruganar commenting on verse 41 of Sri Arunachala Aksharamanamala. Please go ahead, Robert. You want to read it?
Parabhakti, in which one dwells with the Lord as one's own nature in the infinite peace of the self, is not different from jnana. Due to the loss of the personal self, there is in it no trace whatsoever of the ego, the individualized I, nor of the desire to reach the Lord on the dualistic level, as if he were other than oneself, nor of the fatigue that arises from that. From the point of view of actual experience, parabhakti is one with jnana.
Yeah. So due to the loss of personal self, there is in it no trace whatsoever of the ego, the individualist I, nor of the desire to reach the Lord on the dualistic level, as if he were other than oneself, nor of the fatigue that arises from it.
So he's actually distinguishing it from normal bhakti, because bhakti becomes parabhakti when eventually you're sucked in and you become one. Then the bhakti goes and is replaced by parabhakti, which is the same as jnana.
Right.
Because of a particular quote, Muruganar is saying he actually differentiates parabhakti from ordinary bhakti when you do japa or you entertain the thought of some externalized deity.
That's all at the dualistic level. And then he clearly states or somebody recently asked, I think it was probably Shawan, do you get tired or bored, I think, but you never do. So he clearly states it here, that the fatigue that arises from a dualistic devotion doesn't happen.
I thought that was very good, the idea of the fatigue, because if you want to repeat the name of God 109 times.
Yeah, exactly. That doesn't happen when you get to it. Yeah.
But it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in jnana because there's no one to get tired.
Right. And Sri Muruganar continues with this explanation. Please go ahead.
It should be realized that the disparity in names has arisen through the different methods of spiritual practice, which are devotional in nature in the case of bhakti, and through apparent differences on the dualistic level, which occur only in the perception of others, due to their being under the influence of conditioning factors, upadhis. Thus, the difference between the two is in name only. There is not the slightest difference whatsoever in their actual meaning. Both are the blossoming of pure love, manifesting within the self as one's own nature, through the experience of identity with the self, which is being, consciousness, bliss.
Right. So at this point, I'll open up for any comments or questions. Does anyone want to share their personal experience about how this particular Neṟi and particularly this comment of Sri Muruganar connects with them? You know, in terms of the parabhakti and experiencing our own self.
Yeah, this is Stephen. The parabhakti, what I'm getting from that is there's a feeling or an understanding that's not describable in words for me right now. So I'm just sitting with it and listening and going through it a couple of times. And to revert back to analogy, since we were discussing how analogy is a tool, but it's not the end. What I'm getting about parabhakti is that it's like balance. You could describe it all day, but you won't get it until you get the sense of balance.
Right. It's an anubhava, it's an experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where I am with it. Not overthinking, not trying to understand every word in line, because it is comprehensive. And what I do see is there's a place for me to grow and understand more as the experience, you know, moving forward in my life as an experience and understanding through these the constant reference to a verse.
Yeah, I think what could help you is the analogy that Bhagavan has of the women drawing water. I think we mentioned it before, but it sort of fits what you're saying, that the balance, because that's all it is, balance. They're like, you know, like riding a surfboard. You ride it with your toes, and the rest of you's looking at the wave or whatever. Anyway, when the women go to the well, they draw the water and they put the pots on their head, and they all go back to the village, you know, chatting away as if they didn't know the pot was there, because their attention, their background attention, is permanently fixed
on the balance.
That's the balance. That balance has to stay, whether you're, you know, you're asleep, whatever you're doing, thinking, not thinking. You can't go through life not thinking. So there must be a way that you can live without leading your normal life, without involving the ego, and that's the balance. You always remain you retain that awareness of the pot on your head, which is your being, the fact that you're alive. We know that, don't we? We're not going to forget that, but we do forget it. Every time we go into a thought, every time we rush to the coffee machine to get there before the next guy, we've lost the balance.
Right.
Yeah.
So
yes, thank you.
That's a beautiful example. So for those of you who may not be exactly aware of what Robert is talking about in that example, you know, it's like in India, developing country as it is, you know, they're still in villages, you know, ladies having to carry water on a pot on their head for long distances. So the water source will be somewhere, you know, from there they have to fetch it back to their home. And so they put it on the pot is on the head, and then they're chatting and everything. And that balance just simply goes on. And I always was amazed whenever I see that, you know, how they could do it, because I can't even hold it for 1 minute. So it's just amazing. But that's kind of what Robert is referring to. And in that same fashion, in that same manner, we want to keep our focus on ourself, on our awareness at all times. And Bhagavan says in Nanyar, Manathai sada kalamum atmavil vaithiruppadarkkuttan ātma-vichāram endru peyar. So to keep the mind
simple, when he puts it like
focused,
that.
yeah, to focus the mind that on our awareness at all times is what is called ātma-vichāra. I mean, it is so beautifully he says that. And so that example really beautifully goes in well with this. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, just
I kind of
go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, please go ahead, sir.
Anand, go ahead, and then Yasin will go. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just this analogy of a lady carrying a pot with her attention always on the balance and keeping is described in a different way in Bhagavatam, one of these Puranas, where Narada asks Mahavishnu, who is the best bhakta in the whole world, assuming that the answer will be you, right? And then Bhagavan says, no, that farmer, that lady out there who is, going, a housewife who is going to, she is my, the best, and then you probably come as next. And Narada gets very offended, and he says, how come it? Okay, just do this. Okay, so now carry this pot of ghee, the molten butter, fully in this pot, and then come back to me at the end of the day. But not a drop of this ghee should fall on the ground. And Narada, being so unused to that, is so tense and keeps on walking and always so worried rather than, so that's the analogy. So then the story, of course, ends with Narada realizing that, and then comes back to Mahavishnu and then say, I couldn't do it. So, but what's the principle? What's the reason why you told that she is better than me? And so Mahavishnu said the same thing, like her attention is always on the pot, and that's love. And every morning she goes out saying Narayana once or thrice, and then she starts the work, and her attention is always on me. Yeah, so that's the analogy that relates to this.
Thank you. Yasin?
Just kind of a almost silly comment, but just, in relation to, going to the water and, really the power of attention and focus. During the last storm, as I'm sure many of you had, issues, I had a burst pipe, and for about 2 weeks, I could not get a plumber, so I was fortunate my parents were there to shower, to get drinking water, but I needed water to, to flush my toilet, to do all kinds of other things. My neighbors were gracious enough to let me go to their yard. So every day I would have this trek, like where I was just carrying this big pool bucket, back and forth full of water, and just thinking about how do these, women and people in these other countries do, go through this every single day, and just, not just water that they need for survival. And just as you guys said, when their attention is not, on the actual, that they can still carry the big jug on their head and still have conversations with other people, just goes to show just the power of attention and just, where you focus it. We have such a outrageous convenience to, be able to live the way we do, and just it comes to you immediately and everything. And yet, where's your attention? It's usually on the things that are, oh, I want this, or I need that, or, whatever is lying. And so it just goes to show, like that quote, from the Bhagwan's documentary, if you could, sum up all of his teachings in one word: attention.
So, yeah. It's a lesson in humility, right? I mean, it's actually this crisis, we looking back, we had some major crises the last few years. There was this flood one time in, was it Harvey? Just what, 3 years ago? It was completely, our home was flooded. I mean, so we had to throw every bit of peace out outside, it's gone forever. And then, with the first floor, we completely have to rebuild it and so forth. But throughout it all, I mean, there was a big lesson for me personally. It just, you understand and you learn to be humble. That's the most important thing, it just basically go back to how people in the in many parts of the world handle it on a day-to-day basis, and then you pointed that out correctly.
Even with all these conveniences, you say you were still not
right.
Some can't be happy, your attention's not on the right place. I'll leave it at that.
So, in a way, I know it's kind of hard. But someone has literally been through it. It was 7 months of total struggle to get back in, when suddenly 200,000 or more homes in a single region is flooded. Everybody's competing for the same resources, trying to rebuild it back up. It is a real torture. But at the end of the day, I realized that it's actually a good thing to put you back in shape. It's a gift from God. So with that, any other questions or comments?
Yeah.
Yes, Anand, please.
Yeah, just going through in my mind, Bhagavan asking people to do the Girivalam, where there is, it's the equivalent of the bhakti that most people, take it to mean, having an outside object and then pouring your love on that object or form. So this is the best ever that one can see in terms of Bhagavan relating that bhakti of the Giri or an idol to the self, the self-inquiry, because both are based on the love that one has for the self, which manifests in two different ways. One is through the external object back to yourself, so they both merge in that sense. So if people had ever wondered why, Bhagavan wanted people to do the Giri Valam, it is just to make, I think it is to convince, to make the point that both self-inquiry and an external love for a figure which is all pervading are one and the same. Does it make sense, sir?
Yes, it does. Michael points this out nicely, that Anya Bhakti and Ananya Bhakti are mutually complementary. So Anya Bhakti is love for God as someone other than you, and Ananya Bhakti is love for God as none other than you. And both are mutually complementary. Each helps the other, and then you are in that positive cycle, the reinforcing. The second point is, Swami Sadhu mentions this in his commentary to Arunachala, I think it's Arunachala Ashtakam verse 3, and this occurs as an appendix in Ramanavali or Bhagwan Sri Ramana. And he says, Arunachala is the only third-person object which points towards the first-person singular I. So this is a very, very important point. Arunachala is the only third-person object which points to the first-person singular I. So if you all want a tip, something that will help you on a day-to-day basis, that it is. I think Suresh Babu raised his hand. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Namaskaram.
Namaskaram.
I have a question, which is Atma-Visharam. I get it. I didn't get it some years back, but now I get it. But when you try to do it, you always get distracted, from this and that. It may sound like a childish question, but of course, this is my question anyway. So So you try to do it. Maybe it lasts for maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and then it gets distracted. It goes away. So for example, now I'm talking. Probably I'm not doing ātma-svarūpa. I'm concentrating on the question, right? So how do you fix it? Is there a technique, or is there something which would be helpful to do this?
Robert, you want to unmute and answer that question, please?
Well, I can only speak personally, but for me, it's being aware of the breath going in and out, because the body, the breath and the mind are connected. If the breath is controlled, the mind is controlled. And whenever you notice that the thoughts have wandered, bring the attention back to the breath going in and out. And the thing is that the more you do it, I won't say the easier it gets, the more you do it, the more it starts doing itself. So it may seem very slow at first, and you may think you're only doing it for 5 seconds, but in 5 years, you might be sort of most of the time being with yourself, which, believe me, is a lot better than being out there with the thoughts.
So that's...
People have different techniques, and I think
right.
by doing it, you work out what's best for yourself, and also by reading Bhagavan, he's always throwing out ideas that you can use, and most ideas, whether people are doing repeating a mantra, watching the breath, or whatever, but the main thing is that the sense of being, that you're there, and as soon as you realize that you're not there, you come back and you say, oh, I remember reading a book by Uspensky. I used to read it many years ago, and he went out for a walk one day, and he'd been trying to, and he said, I've been into St. Petersburg, over the bridge, back, done my shopping, and then he suddenly realized the whole time I wasn't there, that he didn't have it. Yeah. And we lose it all the time. But right. the simple thing is, it's not really that hard to remember that you exist, but you just have to do it and keep doing it.
So,
as far as techniques go, then you may find your own particular way, and
you're right.
I was going to argue with that.
So I have a.
So, yeah. Oh, one second. Yeah. So, Rabi, 1 second. So let me just add to that, and then I'll come back to you. So Robert made the point that Robert is making is just try a technique that will calm your mind. That's a basic principle that he is driving at.
No, I wouldn't say no. It's not really to calm your mind, because
so
if you try to calm your mind, it'll go crazy.
Yeah. So when you focus, right. So when you focus on your breath or something like that.
The mind calms, but not because you tried to calm it. It's because you move the focus away from it.
Right. And then you focus on your awareness, right?
Michael was saying that last week. Thoughts can't live without your attention.
Mm-hmm.
And that they'll shrivel up as soon as...
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's what I was trying to come at. So the quicker, so no matter what you do, the earlier you start focusing on the awareness, the better, because that itself will deprive the attention on all the thoughts and distractions that Suresh Babu was talking about. So the quicker or the faster, you really don't want to waste much time, and you can do anything to divert your attention, but the earlier you focus on your awareness, the better, because that automatically will deprive the attention on all the other distractions that you're coming across. And that's the key point. And let me at this point go ahead, go to Rabi, please, and that'll be the last comment for this section. Rabi?
Yeah, I sort of wanted to add that instead of being worried about your attention being diverted, follow the advice of Bhagavan and ask this question. And you have to attend to something, right? So instead of saying, ask the question, who is distracted, who wants to be enlightened, and as a result, you're turning your attention back from the distraction. Once you become aware, that's the first step. And the second step is when you ask this question, you sort of gently points your attention back to I, right? The subject.
This is what
And
Sadhguru
I think I find that sometimes.
It says exactly the same thing in Bhagwan Sri Ramana.
Exactly.
You don't use this question as a major tool. You use this, the question, you know, who is thinking these thoughts is when you get distracted. Until you get distracted, there is no need. Does a man need to think as a man? You know.
Right.
So yeah, people take that question to be the practice, but it's not. That question is the way to get back to the practice when you've just lost it.
Exactly.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.